Rose Fletcher's hands trembled as she clutched the rejection letter. Her third this month. The spring breeze of 1874 did nothing to cool the burning humiliation on her cheeks as she stood outside the Fort Worth schoolhouse, watching children file in for their lessons she would not be teaching. She pressed a protective hand to her swollen belly, 5 months along now, and fought back tears that threatened to spill onto the dusty Texas street. "Mrs. Fletcher," Principal Hargrove's voice cut through her thoughts. "I believe I made myself clear. The school board's decision is final." His eyes flicked disapprovingly to her midsection. "An unwed mother cannot possibly be the moral example our children require." Rose straightened her spine. "My husband died at Shiloh, Mr. Hargrove. I am a widow, not unwed. A distinction without a difference, I'm afraid. Either way, your condition makes your employment impossible. What would the children think? What would their parents say?" He adjusted his spectacles with an air of finality. "Good day, Mrs. Fletcher." She watched him retreat into the red brick schoolhouse, the door closing with what felt like devastating permanence. Her teaching certificate, earned through years of scrimping and saving for education in Philadelphia, now seemed nothing more than an expensive piece of paper. Fort Worth was growing quickly with the arrival of the railroad, but its moral sensibilities remained as rigid as the Texas hardpan. Rose turned away, one hand still resting on her unborn child, the other clutching her satchel of lesson plans and books. 6 months ago, she'd arrived in Fort Worth with hopes of starting anew after Thomas's death left her alone in Pennsylvania. Teaching positions for women were plentiful in these western towns hungry for education. She'd secured a position before her pregnancy began to show. Then everything changed. First came the whispers, then the concerned parent meetings, and finally this formal dismissal with no possibility of return. "Seems to me a town so desperate for schooling ought not be so picky about who does the teaching." The deep voice startled her. Rose turned to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post, his broad shoulders filling out a worn leather vest, a cowboy hat tipped low over his eyes. She hadn't noticed him before, too consumed by her own troubles. "Excuse me," she managed, hastily wiping away a tear. He straightened, and she was struck by his height, well over 6 feet, and the quiet intensity of his gaze. His face was weathered by sun and wind, yet he couldn't have been more than 30. "Wade Xanders," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Couldn't help overhearing. Seems a shame is all." Rose lifted her chin. "It's hardly your concern, Mr. Xanders." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe not. But I've got a sister who'd give her eyeteeth for someone to teach her young'uns. Lives on my ranch with her husband. 3 children running wild as jackrabbits because there's no school within 10 miles. Despite herself, Rose felt a flicker of interest. "You have a ranch, the double X, 15 miles north of town." He gestured vaguely toward the horizon. "Got about a dozen families working the place. Between them, nearly 20 children with no education to speak of." "And you're suggesting what, exactly?" Wade Xanders looked directly at her then, and Rose felt something shift in the air between them. "I'm suggesting, Mrs. Fletcher, that if the town won't let you teach here, perhaps you might consider teaching elsewhere." Rose laughed without humor. "And where would that be? In a barn?" His expression remained serious. "If need be, for now." He glanced at her midsection. "Though I reckon we could do better than that for you and your little one. We, the families at the double X, been talking about a school for years, just never found a teacher willing to come out that far." He straightened his hat. "Think on it. I'll be in town until tomorrow noon." With that, he touched his hat brim again and walked toward the mercantile, leaving Rose staring after him, her rejection letter still clutched in her hand. That evening in her small rented room above the milliner's shop, Rose paced the floor. Her options were dwindling faster than her savings. Without a teaching position, she faced returning east in disgrace or finding other employment, neither prospect appealing for a woman in her condition. Wade Xanders' offer lingered in her mind. Teaching children on a remote ranch was hardly what she'd envisioned for herself, but the alternative, watching her educational aspirations crumble while she struggled to support her child, was unthinkable. By morning, her decision was made. She found him at the livery stable, checking the cinch on a magnificent black gelding. "Mr. Xanders," she called, approaching with as much dignity as her condition allowed. He turned, recognition lighting his eyes. "Mrs. Fletcher, I've considered your offer." She took a steadying breath. "If you're serious about establishing a school, I would like to discuss terms." Wade's expression remained impassive, but she caught a glimmer of something approval perhaps in his eyes. "Mighty glad to hear it," he said. "Let's talk specifics over breakfast." "You look like you could use a good meal." The diner across from the livery was already bustling with morning customers. Wade secured them a corner table, well away from curious ears. As they ate, he outlined his proposition. "There's a small cabin near the main house. Nothing fancy, but it's got a good roof and tight walls. Been empty since our foreman moved to his own place. You'd have that to yourself." He buttered a biscuit. "As for the school itself, I figure we start simple. Clear out the old storage barn, put in some proper windows, benches, whatever else is needed." "And my compensation?" Rose asked, practical despite the flutter of excitement she felt. "Room and board for you and your child, plus $30 a month." It was less than the town school paid, but with housing included, it was a fair offer. Better than fair, given her circumstances. The families they won't object to. She gestured to her middle. Wade's expression hardened slightly. "The folks at XX judge a person by their character and their work, nothing else." He set down his coffee cup. "Most came west to leave judgment behind. They won't be casting any on you." Rose studied him, trying to discern his motives. "And you, Mr. Xanders? What do you gain from this arrangement?" A smile creased the corners of his eyes. "Peace, Mrs. Fletcher. My sister's been after me about a school for years, and I believe in education. My father taught me to read by lamplight after long days working cattle, changed my life." He leaned back. "Besides, an educated workforce is good business." It was a practical answer from a practical man. Rose found herself appreciating his straightforwardness. "When would you want me to start? Can you be ready by tomorrow? I'm heading back at noon." Tomorrow, the speed of it took her breath away. "I would need to give notice to my landlady, pack my belongings. I'll send one of my men to help with your things next week," he said. "Bring what you need for now. The rest can follow." Rose's mind raced through practicalities. "And medical care, when my time comes." "Doc Wilson visits the ranch monthly. His wife's a midwife. Between them, you'll be in good hands." He paused. "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town until after." Rose thought of the whispers, the stares, the rejection. "No," she said firmly. "I'll come now." The journey to the XX took the better part of an afternoon. Wade insisted Rose ride in the wagon rather than on horseback, arranging blankets to cushion the wooden seat. Even so, each jolt over the rutted trail sent discomfort through her tired body. As they traveled, the landscape opened before them, rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and oak, the horizon seemingly endless under the vast Texas sky. Occasionally, Wade would point out landmarks or share bits of ranch history, but mostly they rode in companionable silence. When Rose winced particularly hard at a rough patch, Wade slowed the team. "You all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just tired," she admitted. "It's been a difficult few days," he nodded, studying her face. Not much further, another mile and we'll see the main house. True to his word, they soon crested a gentle rise, and the double X spread before them. A large two-story ranch house commanded the center of a cluster of buildings, barns, bunkhouses, corrals, and smaller cabins scattered in a rough circle. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods offering welcome shade. In the distance, cattle grazed on spring grass, white-faced Herefords that Wade explained were his pride and joy. "It's larger than I expected," Rose admitted, taking in the scope of the operation. "Started with 50 acres and 12 cows when my father came from Tennessee in '45, Wade said, pride evident in his voice. "Now we're running 2,000 head on 30,000 acres. He pointed to a small cabin set slightly apart from the others, near a stand of oak trees. "That'll be yours." As they approached the main complex, people emerged from various buildings, ranch hands, women and children, all curious about the new arrival. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop before the main house, and a woman hurried down the steps, her face alight with welcome. "You must be Mrs. Fletcher." "I'm Sarah Xanders Mitchell, Wade's sister." She helped Rose down from the wagon with gentle hands. "We're so pleased you've come. The children haven't stopped talking about having a real teacher since Wade sent word ahead." Sarah was perhaps a few years older than Rose, with the same intense eyes as her brother, though hers were warmed by an easy smile. 3 children hovered at the bottom of the porch steps, staring at Rose with undisguised curiosity. "These are my rascals," Sarah said fondly. "James is 10, Lily 8, and Thomas 6. At the mention of Thomas, Rose felt a pang for her lost husband, but she smiled at the children. "I'm very pleased to meet you all," she said. "I look forward to having you in my classroom." "Do you have books?" Lily asked, wide-eyed. "Real ones with pictures. I have some," Rose answered. "And we'll get more. Wade says you have a baby in your belly," Thomas announced with childish directness, causing his mother to hush him. Rose placed a hand on her stomach. "I do. The baby will come this summer." The boy nodded, apparently satisfied with this information. "Pa says babies are loud. Will it cry during school?" "Thomas Mitchell," Sarah scolded, but Rose laughed. "A fair question. By the time school starts properly, the baby will be here. And yes, sometimes babies cry. We'll work around it." Wade, who had been unloading Rose's trunk, rejoined them. "Sarah, Mrs. Fletcher's had a long journey. Perhaps we should show her to her cabin so she can rest before supper." "Of course. Where are my manners?" Sarah took Rose's arm. "Come, I've had the cabin aired and freshened. It's simple but comfortable. We'll get you settled, and then you must join us for dinner. Everyone's eager to meet you." The cabin, as Wade had promised, was small but sound. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a pot-bellied stove, a table with 4 chairs, and a comfortable-looking rocking chair by the window. A narrow doorway led to a bedroom just large enough for a bed, dresser, and cradle that Rose realized must have been placed there for her coming child. "The cradle was mine, then the children's," Sarah explained, following her gaze. "I thought you might have use of it." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes at the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, I haven't had time to think of such things." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Rest now. I'll send one of the children to fetch you for supper at 6. Left alone, Rose sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just 24 hours ago, she'd been facing rejection and uncertainty. Now she found herself miles from town, committed to building a school in a place she barely knew, among strangers who had welcomed her without question. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift within. "Well, little one," she whispered, "it seems we've found ourselves an adventure." Supper at the main house that evening introduced Rose to more of the Double X community. Besides Sarah, her husband Frank Mitchell, and their children, there was Cookie, the elderly ranch cook who'd been with the Xanders family for 20 years, Hank Wilson, the foreman, and his wife Martha, and several of the senior ranch hands who took their meals at the main house. Wade sat at the head of the table, quiet but attentive, occasionally steering conversation when questions to Rose became too personal. She appreciated his subtle intervention, though she answered openly about her background, her education in Philadelphia, her brief marriage to Thomas Fletcher, an infantry lieutenant who died at Shiloh, and her decision to come west for a fresh start. So the baby's father. Martha Wilson began before her husband nudged her. Is no longer with us, Rose finished smoothly, but his child will know of him. Wade cleared his throat. Mrs. Fletcher is here to teach, not to satisfy our curiosity, he said firmly. Speaking of which, I thought we might look at the old storage barn tomorrow, see what needs doing to convert it. The conversation shifted to plans for the school, with various ranch families offering materials, labor, and enthusiasm. By the end of the meal, Rose felt cautiously optimistic about her new situation. As the weeks passed, Rose found herself settling into life at the Double X. The cabin became a home, brightened by wildflowers Sarah's children brought and curtains Martha Wilson helped her sew. Each day, she watched the progress on the schoolhouse, for that's what the old storage barn was rapidly becoming. Wade had thrown himself into the project with unexpected vigor. He worked alongside his men, installing windows to let in light, building benches and desks from ranch lumber, and constructing a proper blackboard. Rose often walked down to observe, offering suggestions that he invariably implemented without argument. You're putting a great deal of effort into this, she remarked one afternoon as he measured lumber for bookshelves. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Told you education matters to me. Yes, but this goes beyond providing basics. She gestured to the carefully crafted details, the shaped desk legs, the sanded smooth edges of every surface, the perfectly spaced windows. Wade was silent a moment, focusing on his measurement. Finally, he said, My mother was a teacher back in Tennessee. Came west with my father, thinking she'd continue here. He marked the board with deliberate care. But children and ranch work filled her days. By the time things settled enough for her to think about teaching again, there was nothing but a one-room cabin miles from anywhere, no proper books, no supplies. He set down his pencil. She died when I was 12, Sarah just 14. Consumption. One of her regrets was never getting to really teach out here. He looked around the space taking shape. Guess I'm making up for that in a way. The personal revelation touched Rose deeply. She would be proud of this, she said softly. Wade's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared purpose. Then he nodded once and returned to his work. As her pregnancy advanced, Rose found herself increasingly grateful for the community that had embraced her. Sarah checked on her daily, bringing fresh milk and eggs. Martha Wilson shared herbal remedies for swollen ankles and back pain. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when they passed, and several of their wives made baby clothes in anticipation of the birth. Even Wade, for all his reserve, showed consistent concern for her welfare. He'd appear at her cabin with armloads of firewood, install a porch swing where she could sit comfortably in the evening air, or bring books he thought might interest her from his own surprisingly extensive library. On an unusually hot June afternoon, Rose was organizing the newly completed schoolhouse, arranging the modest collection of books she'd brought, and others Wade had ordered from catalogs in Dallas. The baby was particularly active, and she paused to catch her breath, pressing a hand to her side where a tiny foot or elbow protruded. "Everything all right?" She turned to find Wade in the doorway, hat in hand, concern etched on his features. "Yes, just the baby saying hello." She smiled, then winced as another kick came. Wade crossed to her, hesitated, then asked, "May I?" His hand hovered near her abdomen. Surprised by the request, Rose nodded. She guided his calloused hand to where the baby was most active. For a moment, nothing happened, then a forceful kick pressed against his palm. Wade's eyes widened, and a rare, full smile transformed his face. "Strong," he said softly, "like its mother." The intimacy of the moment caught Rose off guard. She became acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his hand through her dress, the intensity of his gaze. Something stirred within her, something she'd believed died with Thomas. Wade seemed to realize the shift as well. He stepped back, clearing his throat. "I brought these," he said, retrieving a package from beside the door. "Slate boards for the students. Ordered them special from Fort Worth." "Thank you," Rose said, trying to regain her composure. "They'll be perfect." He nodded, replacing his hat. "Doc Wilson's making his monthly visit tomorrow. Said he'd stop by to check on you." "I appreciate that." She smoothed her dress over her belly. "Though I still have several weeks to go, I believe." "Good, that's good." He seemed uncharacteristically awkward. "Well, I'll let you get back to your organizing." As he left, Rose found herself watching his retreating figure longer than necessary, one hand still resting where his had been moments before. July brought blistering heat that even the thick walls of Rose's cabin couldn't fully repel. Her due date approached, and with it, a growing anticipation and anxiety. The baby had dropped lower, making breathing easier but walking more difficult. Dr. Wilson had assured her everything progressed normally, but being so far from town from a proper hospital occasionally sent ripples of fear through her confidence. On the morning of July 15th, Rose woke to a dull backache. Thinking little of it, such discomfort had become her constant companion. She went about her morning routine. By midday, however, the pain had developed a rhythmic quality that she recognized from her midwifery books as the beginning of labor. She was arranging baby clothes when a particularly sharp contraction made her gasp aloud. As it eased, she heard a knock at her door. "Mrs. Fletcher." "Rose," Wade's voice called. "Are you all right?" She made her way to the door, opening it to find him looking worried. "I heard," he began, then noted her expression. "It's time," Rose nodded, another contraction beginning. "I think so. Could you send for Mrs. Wilson?" "She's gone to town with the doctor. Won't be back till tomorrow." Alarm crossed his features. "I'll send a rider for them right away." "There may not be time," Rose said, breathing through the pain. "First babies often come slowly, but this one seems eager." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "I'll fetch Sarah." Within the hour, Sarah had arrived with Martha's teenage daughter, Rebecca, who had assisted at several births. The women transformed Rose's bedroom into a birthing chamber. Hanging sheets soaked in cool water to combat the heat, boiling water and preparing clean linens. Outside, Wade paced the length of the small porch, his concern evident to anyone who passed. Several times, Sarah emerged to send him on errands: more water, more towels, a fresh block of ice from the ranch's ice house. As afternoon turned to evening, Rose's labor intensified. Her cries occasionally escaped the cabin, each one driving Wade to clench his fists in helpless worry. Ranch hands who came to inquire were sent away with assurances that all proceeded normally, but Wade remained, a self-appointed sentry. Shortly after midnight, a new sound pierced the night: the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. Wade froze mid-pace, his eyes fixed on the cabin door. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Sarah appeared, her face tired but radiant. "A boy," she announced, "healthy and strong, and Rose is doing well." Wade released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Would it be proper for me to see them?" Sarah studied her brother for a moment, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Give them a few minutes to get settled," she said gently. "Then yes, I think Rose would welcome your visit." When Wade was finally allowed to enter, he found Rose propped against pillows, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face exhausted but glowing with an inner light he'd never seen before. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, lay a tiny red-faced infant. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said softly, hat clutched awkwardly in his hands. "I think after standing guard all night you might call me Rose," she replied with a tired smile. He moved closer, his eyes drawn to the small bundle. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" The question clearly startled Wade. I don't know how." "Sit here." Rose patted the edge of the bed. When he complied, she carefully transferred the swaddled infant to his arms, showing him how to support the head. Wade stared down at the tiny face in wonder. The baby's eyes, newborn blue but likely to darken, blinked up at him, unfocused but somehow knowing. "What will you call him?" Wade asked, unable to look away from the child. "Thomas, after his father," Rose said softly. "Thomas William Fletcher." "A good name," Wade nodded. "Strong." As he reluctantly returned the baby to Rose's arms, their eyes met over the child's head. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection, a possibility neither was ready to acknowledge but neither could deny. The weeks following Thomas's birth brought new rhythms to the Double X. Rose recovered her strength quickly, driven partly by determination to be ready for the school's opening in September. The baby thrived, growing plumper and more alert daily, his presence bringing a stream of visitors to the cabin. Wade was among the most frequent, though his visits always came with practical reasons: repairs to the cabin, updates on the schoolhouse, books and supplies delivered. Yet Rose noticed he stayed longer each time, often holding little Thomas while she prepared tea or organized teaching materials. "He has your eyes," Wade remarked one evening as the baby gazed up at him. "Same color, same way of looking right through a person." Rose smiled, watching them from across the small table. "His father's chin, though, and perhaps his temperament. He's remarkably patient for one so young." Wade's expression shifted subtly at the mention of Thomas's father. "You must miss him greatly," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Rose considered her answer. "I honor his memory," she said finally. "Thomas was a good man, brave and kind. He would have been an excellent father." She touched her wedding ring, still on her finger. "But life continues for those left behind. I've learned that grief doesn't end, but it changes. Makes room for new feelings." Wade studied her face, seeming to weigh her words. "That takes courage." "No more than building a new life in an unknown place," she replied. "No more than creating a school because you believe in education and possibility." A smile touched his lips. "Touché, Mrs. Fletcher." "Rose," she reminded him gently. "Rose," he repeated, the single syllable carrying unexpected weight between them. By late August, preparations for the school's opening reached their final stages. The transformed barn now stood as a proper schoolhouse, with gleaming windows, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. A hand-painted sign reading "Double X School" hung above the door, the work of one of the ranch hands who had unexpected artistic talent. The student body would comprise 17 children ranging from 6 to 16, from the ranch families and 2 neighboring homesteads. Rose had spent hours organizing lessons appropriate for various ages and abilities, creating a schedule that would allow her to rotate attention among different groups. The question of how to manage teaching while caring for an infant had been answered by Sarah, who offered to mind Thomas during school hours, bringing him to Rose at midday for nursing. It was a practical arrangement that eased Rose's primary concern about fulfilling her responsibilities. 2 days before the school's scheduled opening, Wade found Rose in the schoolhouse, writing the alphabet in perfect penmanship on the blackboard. Thomas slept in a basket nearby, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. "Everything to your satisfaction?" Wade asked, surveying the room with pride. "Beyond my expectations," Rose admitted. "It rivals any school I've seen, even in Philadelphia." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent that always accompanied him. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens when winter comes. The trail between here and your cabin will be difficult in bad weather, especially with the baby." Rose set down her chalk. "I've considered that as well. Perhaps we could arrange for one of the older boys to escort us on the worst days." Wade shook his head. "I have another suggestion." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "The main house has a room off the kitchen. Used to be a study. It's standing empty since I moved my books upstairs. Could be converted to a classroom for the coldest months." "That's very generous," Rose said, touched by his foresight. "But what about the inconvenience to you? Having children trooping through your home, not much different from having ranch hands in and out all day," he shrugged. "And there's another benefit." He cleared his throat. "There's a small suite of rooms on the first floor. My mother's sewing room and a connecting bedroom. With some freshening up, they could make comfortable quarters for you and Thomas. For the winter," he added quickly. "Just until the worst weather passes." The offer surprised her. "You'd have us live in your home." "It makes practical sense," he said, though his eyes suggested more than practicality motivated him. "The cabin's drafty, no matter how much chinking we do, not ideal for a young baby, and you wouldn't have to travel through snow and mud to reach the schoolroom." Rose studied his face, reading the concern there and perhaps something deeper. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you for thinking of us." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." As he turned to leave, Rose called after him. "Wade." He paused at the door. "You've done so much for me and Thomas, for all the children here. I don't know that I've properly thanked you." A small smile softened his features. "Seeing this school come to life is thanks enough." His eyes met hers. "Seeing you happy here, that matters to me." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Rose to wonder at the warmth his words kindled within her. The Double X School opened on September 1, 1874, with a small ceremony attended by all the ranch families. Wade had arranged for a photographer from Fort Worth to document the occasion, an expense that surprised Rose until she realized he was creating a legacy, fulfilling his mother's dream and establishing something that would outlast them all. The first weeks of teaching brought challenges and joys. Rose quickly identified which students needed extra attention, which excelled in different subjects, and how to manage the varying ages effectively. The older children helped with the younger ones, creating a community of learning that Rose fostered carefully. Thomas, now nearly 2 months old, adapted well to the arrangement. He spent mornings with Sarah, joined Rose at midday, then often slept in his basket during afternoon lessons. The students became protective of their baby, taking pride in helping care for him during school hours. As September waned, the first cool fronts pushed down from the north, bringing wind that rattled the schoolhouse windows and sent leaves swirling across the ranch yard. Rose found herself thinking more often of Wade's offer of winter accommodation in the main house. The decision was hastened by an early October norther that brought freezing rain, coating the landscape in ice. Rose spent a miserable night keeping the stove stoked, wrapping Thomas in extra blankets, and worrying about the half-mile walk to the schoolhouse in such treacherous conditions. At dawn, a knock at her door revealed Wade, heavily bundled against the weather. "School's canceled today," he announced. "Too dangerous for the children to travel." His eyes took in her tired face, the baby bundled in multiple layers, and the thin stream of smoke from her struggling stove. "The offer to move to the main house still stands," he said quietly. "No need to decide this minute, but the rooms are ready whenever you are." Rose looked around the cabin, her first real home with Thomas, a place of independence and new beginnings. Yet practicality demanded she consider what was best for her son. "Perhaps we could look at the rooms today," she suggested. "Since there's no school." Wade's face brightened. "Of course. When you're ready, I'll escort you up to the house." The rooms in the main house exceeded Rose's expectations. Spacious and warm, they offered comforts her cabin lacked: indoor plumbing, abundant hot water from the kitchen's reservoir, and proximity to help if needed. The bedroom contained a four-poster bed that had belonged to Wade's mother, and the adjoining sitting room had been arranged as a nursery, complete with Thomas's cradle, and a rocking chair positioned near a window overlooking the ranch yard. "Sarah helped prepare everything," Wade explained, watching Rose's reaction carefully. "Said a woman would know what another woman would want." Rose ran her hand over the polished wood of the dresser, noting the vase of late wildflowers placed atop it. "It's lovely," she said. "Far more than I expected." "Then you'll accept, for the winter at least." Looking at the cozy rooms, then at her son's content face as Sarah held him by the warm stove, Rose nodded. "Yes, thank you, it's the sensible choice." Wade's relief was palpable. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then added, "Having you both here. It'll be nice. For the house. Been too quiet since Sarah married and moved to her own cabin." The move to the main house altered Rose's relationship with Wade in subtle but significant ways. Sharing meals, passing in hallways, hearing each other's movements through the old house, these small intimacies created a domestic atmosphere neither had anticipated. Wade proved himself an unexpectedly considerate housemate. He altered his schedule to accommodate Thomas's nap times, built a bookcase in Rose's sitting room for her growing collection, and often appeared in the evening with a book he thought might interest her or a sweet treat Cookie had prepared. For Rose, these months brought a gradual healing. The grief for Thomas Fletcher remained, but it sat differently now, a quiet sorrow that could coexist with new joys. She found herself laughing more, noticing beauty in everyday moments and looking forward rather than back. She also found herself increasingly aware of Wade as a man, not merely her benefactor or employer. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gently his large hands handled her son, the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch. At times, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, though he always looked away when their eyes met. Winter settled fully over North Texas, bringing occasional snow and frequent cold rains. The schoolhouse arrangement proved its worth, as children needed only to brave the short walk to the main house rather than the longer trek to the converted barn. On the worst days, ranch hands transported the more distant students in covered wagons. Christmas approached, bringing festive preparations to the Double X. Sarah organized the women in decorating the main house with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles. Cookie outdid himself planning feasts and treats, and the men ventured out to find the perfect tree for the main parlor. Rose found herself swept up in the holiday spirit, helping to make ornaments with the schoolchildren and teaching them Christmas carols to perform for their families. For Thomas's first Christmas, she embroidered a small stocking, feeling bittersweet as she realized all the firsts his father would miss. Wade noticed her melancholy one evening as she stitched by the fire, Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby. He set aside his account books and studied her face in the flickering light. "What's troubling you?" he asked softly. Rose looked up, surprised by his perception. "Just thinking of Thomas, my husband, how he's missing these moments with our son." Wade nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He'd be proud of you both, of how you've carried on, made a good life." "I believe so," she said. "He was never one to dwell on sorrows. He'd want me to find happiness again." Something flickered in Wade's eyes. "And have you found happiness here?" Rose considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Not the life I imagined, but one with purpose and connection." She met his gaze directly. "I'm grateful for what you've created here, for all of us." Wade moved from his chair to sit beside her on the settee, closer than propriety might strictly allow. "I have a confession," he said, his voice low. "When I first offered you the teaching position, it was partly because I was angry at the town's hypocrisy, at how they treated you." "Only partly?" Rose asked, her heart quickening at his nearness. "Mostly it was because I saw something in you. Strength, grace under pressure, intelligence." His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on her embroidery. "I wanted that at the double X, wanted my sister's children and all the others to learn from someone like you." The warmth of his hand on hers sent a tremor through Rose. "And now," she whispered, his eyes, intensely blue in the firelight, held hers. "Now I want more than that, but I've no right to ask, and you've been through so much already." Rose turned her hand beneath his, threading their fingers together. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "you might ask anyway. When the time is right." A cautious hope lit his features. "I can be a patient man." "I know," she smiled. "It's one of the things I've come to admire about you." The moment hung between them, full of possibility, until Thomas stirred in his cradle. The spell broken, Wade reluctantly withdrew his hand and rose. "Merry Christmas, Rose," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Wade." Christmas Day brought a house full of celebration as ranch families gathered for worship, feasting, and fellowship. Children received simple but treasured gifts: carved wooden animals from one of the older ranch hands, candy from Fort Worth, and books Wade had ordered specially. For the adults, there were practical presents: warm gloves, baked goods, homemade preserves. Rose was touched to receive gifts from many of the families: a quilt made by the women, a hand-knitted shawl, toys for Thomas. From Sarah came a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording school memories, she said with a wink. Wade's gift, presented privately after the others had departed, left her speechless. A delicate gold locket on a fine chain, simple yet elegant, opened to reveal a tiny compartment. "For a picture of Thomas," he explained as he placed it in her palm. "And perhaps someday one of someone else important to you." The gesture's meaning wasn't lost on Rose. "It's beautiful," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Would you help me put it on?" He moved behind her, his fingers brushing her neck as he fastened the clasp. The brief touch sent warmth cascading through her. Her gift to him had been modest by comparison: a hand-embroidered handkerchief with his initials, and a book of Tennyson's poetry she'd noticed him admiring in a catalog. Yet the way he handled both, as if they were precious treasures, told her their value to him far exceeded their cost. "Thank you," he said, running his thumb over the stitched WX. "No one's made something just for me in, well, a very long time." As winter gradually yielded to spring, Rose found herself contemplating her future at the Double X. The arrangement had been framed as temporary teaching until the town reconsidered its position, living in the main house just for the winter. Yet as March brought the first wildflowers and warming days, she realized she had no desire to return to Fort Worth or seek a position elsewhere. The school flourished, with students making remarkable progress. Thomas, now 8 months old, was crawling everywhere, babbling constantly and charming everyone on the ranch. And then there was Wade, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger, though neither had yet found the courage to define it openly. On a mild Saturday in late March, Wade invited Rose to ride with him to a distant corner of the ranch. Sarah happily offered to watch Thomas, practically shooing them out the door with a knowing smile. Wade had arranged a gentle mare for Rose and packed a simple picnic. They rode through greening pastures, Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing ranch history. Rose, who had grown comfortable on horseback during her months at the XX, enjoyed the freedom of the open landscape and Wade's relaxed companionship. By midday, they reached their destination, a secluded bend in the creek where cottonwoods provided dappled shade, and a small meadow bloomed with early flowers. Wade spread a blanket and unpacked their meal while Rose admired the peaceful setting. "It's beautiful here," she said, accepting the plate he offered. "Do you come often?" "When I need to think," he admitted. "My father used to bring me here when I was a boy, said a man sees clearer with sky above him and earth below." They ate companionably, the conversation flowing easily between ranch matters, school progress, and Thomas's latest achievements. As they finished, Wade grew quieter, his expression turning serious. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said finally, setting aside his cup. "About the school and your position here." Rose felt a flutter of unease. "Is there a problem?" "No, nothing like that." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as signaling nervousness. "The opposite, in fact. The school's been more successful than I ever imagined. The children are thriving, the parents are pleased." "But," Rose prompted when he hesitated, "but the arrangement was meant to be temporary. With spring here, you might be thinking about your next steps." His eyes held hers. "I want to offer you a permanent position as the XX school teacher for as long as you wish to stay." Relief washed through her. "I would like that very much." A smile touched his lips, though tension remained in his posture. "There's more," he said. "The cabin, it's yours for as long as you want it. But I've grown accustomed to having you and Thomas in the main house." He took a deep breath. "I'd like you to consider staying, not as my tenant or employee, but as my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Rose's heart pounded as she processed his proposal. "I know it's sudden," Wade continued when she didn't immediately respond. "And I know you're still honoring your husband's memory. I wouldn't ask you to forget him or stop loving him." He reached for her hand. "But I've come to care for you, Rose, and for Thomas, as if he were my own. I think we could build a good life together." Rose looked at their joined hands, then up at his earnest face. "It isn't sudden," she said softly. "Not really. We've been moving toward this for months, haven't we?" Hope kindled in his eyes. "I believe we have. I care for you too, Wade, deeply." She squeezed his hand. "But marriage is a serious step. For me, for Thomas, for you. I need to be certain." "Of course," he nodded. "Take all the time you need to consider. My feelings won't change." Rose studied him, this man who had created a school because she needed to teach, who had held her son with such tenderness, who had respected her grief while offering new possibilities. "I don't need more time," she decided. "My answer is yes." Joy transformed Wade's face. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You've made me the happiest man in Texas," he said, voice rough with emotion. "There's something else," Rose said, her eyes serious. "I want to be clear about Thomas. If we marry, would you consider adopting him legally?" Wade finished for her. Nothing would make me prouder than to call him my son. Tears sprang to Rose's eyes. Then yes, Wade Xanders, I will marry you. He drew her gently toward him, and when their lips met, Rose felt a sense of homecoming she hadn't expected to find again. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with promise and shared longing. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Christmas," he admitted. Rose smiled. "I've wanted you to since Christmas." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch, met with approval and genuine happiness. Sarah was especially delighted, hugging Rose fiercely and declaring, "I've been praying for this since November." They set the wedding date for early May, allowing time for preparations while keeping the ceremony relatively simple. Rose wrote to her parents in Philadelphia, explaining her new circumstances and inviting them to attend, though she knew the distance made their coming unlikely. Wade surprised her by suggesting they travel east to meet her family later in the year. "Thomas should know his maternal grandparents," he said, "and I'd like to meet the people who raised such an extraordinary daughter." These considerations, his thoughtfulness toward her family, his eagerness to be a father to Thomas, his partnership in her teaching ambitions, all confirmed for Rose that she was making the right choice. The wedding took place on May 7, 1875, in the Double X schoolhouse, transformed for the occasion with wildflowers, ribbons, and candles. The entire ranch community attended, along with a few of Wade's business associates from Fort Worth, and the circuit riding minister who served the area's scattered faithful. Rose wore a gown of pearl gray silk that Sarah and Martha had helped her make, accented with the locket Wade had given her at Christmas. Thomas, now 10 months old and recently taking his first wobbly steps, was held by Sarah during the ceremony, dressed in a miniature suit that matched Wade's. When they exchanged vows, Wade added a promise of his own. "I will love Thomas as my own son and any other children with which we may be blessed. I will support your calling as a teacher, and together we will build something lasting for this community and our family." Rose, moved by his words, responded with equal conviction. "I will be your partner in all things. Together we will create a home filled with love, learning, and possibility." The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with feasting, music, and dancing in the ranch yard under lantern light. As the festivities continued, Wade led Rose away from the crowd, toward the main house that was now truly their home. "Happy, Mrs. Xanders?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Though I may still be Mrs. Fletcher in the schoolroom, the children are used to it. You can be whoever you need to be," he said, kissing her temple. "As long as you're my wife when the school bell rings its last." "Always," she promised, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Later, after Thomas had been settled in his cradle and the newlyweds were alone, Wade presented Rose with a final surprise: the deed to the schoolhouse and surrounding acre, legally established as the Double X School in perpetuity. "No matter what happens with the ranch in future generations, the school will always exist," he explained. "Your legacy is secure." Rose, overwhelmed by the gesture, could only embrace him, words failing to express the depth of her gratitude and love. In the years that followed, the Double X School became known throughout North Texas for its educational excellence. As Fort Worth grew with the expanding railroad and cattle trade, families occasionally moved to the area specifically so their children could attend Rose's school. The town that had once rejected her now pointed to the Double X School with pride when visitors inquired about educational opportunities in the region. Thomas William Fletcher Xanders, legally adopted by Wade on his first birthday, grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy with his mother's love of learning and his adoptive father's quiet strength. When he was 3, he welcomed a baby sister, Sarah Elizabeth, named for both grandmothers. 2 years later, James Wade joined the family, completing their household. Rose continued teaching even as she raised her growing family, sometimes with a baby on her hip or a toddler playing quietly in the corner of the schoolroom. Wade expanded the school as enrollment increased, adding a second room and eventually hiring an assistant teacher, a young woman from Dallas who, like Rose years before, needed a fresh start away from judgment. On warm evenings, Wade and Rose often sat on the porch of the main house, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the ranch. Sometimes they spoke of the future, their hopes for the children, plans for the school, dreams for the ranch. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, his hand holding hers, content in the life they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked one such evening as they watched 10-year-old Thomas teaching his younger siblings to lasso a practice post. "Coming to the double X instead of fighting for your position in town?" Rose considered the question, thinking of all that had transpired since that spring day in 1874 when she'd stood rejected outside the Fort Worth schoolhouse. "Not for a moment," she said, squeezing his hand. "The town wouldn't let me teach with a child. You built me my own school." She smiled up at him. "And in doing so, you built me a home, a family, a future I couldn't have imagined." Wade pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. "We built it together," he corrected gently. "That's the beauty of it." As twilight deepened to dusk, they called the children in for supper, the family gathering around the table in the warm light of the ranch house that had become the heart of their world. Outside, the Texas sky stretched endless and star-filled above the double X, the little schoolhouse standing as testament to what love, determination, and belief in second chances could create. For Rose and Wade Xanders, it was more than enough. It was everything.